The billionaire pointed at the front gate. "You're fired." 7 household staff members stood frozen in the marble entrance hall, and not one of them breathed. Maria Vasquez had worked in this house for 30 years. She had raised this man from the age of 4. She had sat with his dying father. She had kept a secret for 2 years that could level everything Daniel Hale had ever built. And right now, she was being escorted out by a security guard while his girlfriend watched from the doorway with a satisfied smile. Maria walked past the portrait of Richard Hale at the base of the staircase. She paused for just 1 second, looking at the face of the man who had trusted her with everything. Then she walked out through the iron gates. What Daniel Hale did not know was that his father had spent 27 years quietly, deliberately, and legally building something. Not for Daniel, for her. And in 3 weeks, Daniel Hale was going to find out what 30 years of dismissed loyalty actually costs. Her name was Maria Vasquez, 68 years old, the kind of woman who arrives early and leaves late and never once mentions either. She had come to the Hale estate 30 years ago, the week that Daniel's mother died. Eleanor Hale had passed in October, and the house had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the season. Richard Hale didn't know how to grieve in ways that were useful to a 4-year-old. He knew how to work, and he worked. Maria found Daniel on the 3rd day, sitting at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, waiting for a sound that was not going to come. She sat down beside him. She didn't talk about his mother. She asked if he was hungry. He said no. She stayed anyway. They sat there until the house got dark, and Richard found his son asleep against the arm of the new housekeeper, who had not moved for 2 hours, rather than disturb him. Richard looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. That was the beginning of 30 years. Maria had watched Daniel grow up, graduate, inherit, change. She had cooked for him when he was sick and attended his graduations and kept the programs in a cedar chest at the foot of her apartment bed. She was not his mother. She never claimed to be. She was simply the woman who had been there, which is a different thing, and in some ways, a more permanent one. 2 years before his death, Richard Hale had called Maria into his private study on a quiet Sunday evening. He placed 2 things on the desk, an envelope and a set of legal documents from a firm called Alderton, Crane & Associates. "I need you to hold something, not to open it, not to use it," he paused, "unless the time comes when it needs to exist." Maria looked at the envelope. "I'll hold it," she said. She brought it home and placed it in the small locked metal box on her closet shelf. She had looked at it many times over 2 years. She had never opened it. Not yet. Daniel Hale was 40 years old and had spent 18 months becoming someone his father would not have recognized. When Richard died, Daniel inherited Hale Capital, the estate, in a company built on 30 years of relationships, loyalty, and patient trust. He had absorbed his father's intelligence. He had not absorbed his father's understanding of what that intelligence was for. In 18 months, he had terminated 11 long-term vendor contracts, restructured the pension commitments for retired staff, replaced senior employees with cheaper alternatives, made every decision as if the machine was a tool that needed optimizing, and never once asked what the machine was built to. And then he met Vanessa. Vanessa Marsh was 32, sharp, and had identified Daniel as her destination before they were ever in the same room. She understood people as resources, which made her dangerous in specific and targeted ways. Her dislike of Maria was genuine. Maria knew Daniel in a way that preceded Vanessa and could not be overwritten, and that made her a threat that Vanessa could not calculate around. Vanessa never told Daniel to fire Maria. She was smarter than that. Over 6 months of dinners and conversations, she built a case in language that sounded like his own thoughts. The estate needs modernization. Long-term staff develop territorial habits. Loyalty is not efficiency. Maria is attached to how things used to be. She said it until Daniel began saying it himself.
On a Tuesday morning in November, he gathered the staff and said it out loud. And Maria walked through the gate, and the locked box on the shelf in her closet waited. If this story is already pulling you in, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the bell, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything.
Most men, having fired a 68-year-old woman who raised them, would have left it there. Daniel Hale did not leave it there. 3 days after Maria left, his legal team contacted the staffing agency to ensure her severance was processed at the minimum legal requirement, not the enhanced package Richard had outlined in the estate's internal HR documentation, the minimum. When Maria submitted a reference request to facilitate new employment applications, the estate's administrative office responded with a form letter confirming dates of employment and nothing further. No characterization, no commendation. 30 years reduced to a start date and an end date. Rosa, the young housekeeper who had watched Maria walk out and said 30 years to an empty room, was called into Daniel's office on Thursday and told that expressing sympathy for terminated employees was not aligned with the estate's professional culture. Rosa nodded. She said nothing. She went home that evening and called Maria. She wasn't the only one who called. Maria's phone had been ringing since Tuesday. People from the estate, people from the neighborhood. Father Dominguez from the parish, Mrs. Okafor from the second floor, who appeared at Maria's door on Thursday with a covered dish and the expression of a woman who has decided that something unacceptable has occurred and intends to respond. Maria accepted all of it with a quiet grace. She was not performing dignity, she simply had it. What she did not tell any of them was that on Wednesday morning she had received a letter from Alderton, Crane and Associates. She had read it twice. Then she had gone to her bedroom and taken the locked metal box down from the shelf. She had sat on the edge of the bed with it in her lap for a long time. The box held what Richard Hale trusted her with, what she had carried for 2 years without opening, what she had always believed she might never need to use. She turned the small key in the lock, and she opened it. Inside, arranged with the careful organization of a man who thought about the people who came after him, were 3 things. An envelope, Richard Hale's handwriting on the front, for Maria to open when necessary. A set of legal documents, 8 pages, Alderton, Crane and Associates letterhead, and a photograph. The photograph showed 2 people, Richard Hale, younger, visibly shaken, sitting across a table from a man Maria did not recognize. Between them on the table were documents. The date stamp on the back, 27 years ago. Maria looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she opened Richard's envelope and read his letter. She read it once, then again, then a 3rd time. When she set it down, her hands were steady, but the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who has just been handed the full weight of something she had agreed to carry without knowing how heavy it was. She picked up her phone and called the number on the Alderton Crane letterhead. A man named Elias Crane answered on the 2nd ring, as if he had been waiting. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, "I expected your call. We have quite a bit to discuss." What was in that letter? What did Richard Hale trust her with that was so powerful he kept it secret for 27 years? Stay with this story, the answer is coming, and it is bigger than you think. On the same day Maria opened the box, Daniel Hale made the first of several decisions that would come to define the following 3 weeks. His legal team had completed the preliminary audit of Richard's personal accounts. Standard administrative procedure, they had told him, routine estate settlement. It was not routine. Buried in the account records was a corporate trust, structured through a Delaware holding entity, established 27 years ago. Annual contributions, consistent, unannounced for nearly 3 decades. The digital records were incomplete, transferred from paper with a gap in the beneficiary data fields. The name in the field was partial, M. Vasquez. Daniel stared at his screen for a long moment. He called his attorney.
His attorney told him the trust was administered by a firm called Alderton, Crane and Associates, and that the full documentation would need to be requested through formal channels. Daniel told his attorney to request it immediately. His attorney sent the formal request. Alderton Crane responded the following morning with a letter confirming the trust was active, its provisions were in effect, and the beneficiary had been notified. Daniel read the response 3 times. He called Alderton Crane directly. The attorney who answered was pleasant, professional, and immovable. The trust's specific structure could not be discussed with anyone other than the beneficiary. Daniel was welcome to continue through legal channels. Daniel hung up. He sat at his father's desk and looked at the objects on it: the letter opener, the glass paperweight, the framed photograph from Daniel's graduation, himself at 22, his father, and Maria, slightly to the left, included on Richard's quiet instruction. He looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he called his head of security. "I need Maria Vasquez's current address," he said.
His security team had the address within the hour. What they also found, because Daniel had told them to pull everything, was something he had not anticipated. The trust at Alderton Crane was not a simple financial gift. His team had found the Delaware incorporation records through public filing databases. The trust held assets, structured assets, and the asset class was listed in the incorporation documents in language that required no interpretation. Equity shares, Hale Capital. Daniel read the filing and felt the floor shift. He called his attorney back. "How much?" he said, without context, because his attorney had been working the same database for the past 40 minutes and already knew the question. His attorney told him 18%. 18% of Hale Capital's voting shares, accumulated through 27 years of structured contributions, sitting in a Delaware trust with Maria Vasquez's name on it. Daniel set the phone down. He sat at his father's desk in the house his father had built and looked at the wall. 18%. The woman he had fired 4 days ago, the woman his legal team had processed minimum severance for, the woman's reference request had been answered with a form letter confirming dates of employment. She owned 18% of his company. He picked the phone back up. "Challenge it," he said. "Daniel, I want it challenged. Full legal review, every document. I want to know if there's any basis to contest the trust's validity." His attorney was quiet for a moment. "I have to advise you," the attorney said carefully, "that Richard Hale's estate documentation was airtight. Your father used Alderton Crane for 40 years. Elias Crane is one of the most careful attorneys in this state. Any challenge is going to be—" "Find a basis," Daniel said. "That's what I'm paying you for." He hung up. In the 5 minutes it took to make that call, 2 things had happened that Daniel did not know about. Maria Vasquez, sitting at her kitchen table across the city, had received a call from Elias Crane informing her that Daniel's legal team had begun a formal challenge to the trust, and Elias Crane had told her something else, something that when she heard it made her close her eyes for a moment and exhale slowly. Richard, it seemed, had anticipated this possibility. He had prepared for it. The legal challenge consumed 6 days and accomplished nothing except making the situation considerably worse. Aldrich, Crane responded to every filing with documentation so thorough and so clearly prepared in advance that Daniel's attorney eventually called him and said, in the flat voice of a professional describing an unwinnable position, that the trust had been constructed specifically to withstand exactly this kind of challenge. Every potential weakness had been anticipated and sealed. Richard Hale had not simply created the trust, he had armored it. Daniel authorized the next escalation anyway. He instructed his team to investigate whether Maria's original employment contract contained any provisions that could affect her eligibility as a trust beneficiary. They found nothing. He had them audit her references, her tax filings, her history with the estate, looking for any irregularity that could be used as leverage. They found nothing.
He called Vanessa. Vanessa told him the trust was probably a sentimental gesture that could be managed, that 18% wasn't controlling, that he needed to focus on the quarterly numbers and stop fixating on a 68-year-old housekeeper. Daniel looked at the numbers while she said this. The quarterly numbers were not good. Aldrich, his lead investor, had moved the meeting request from routine to urgent. 2 more senior managers had submitted resignations in the past week. The operational gaps from the vendor restructuring had compounded into something that was now visible to outside observers, which meant it was visible to Aldrich. Vanessa told him it was temporary, growing pains. Daniel looked at the numbers. He thought about his father, sitting at this desk, about Richard's deliberate, patient way of doing things, about the 15-year vendor relationships he had terminated, about the pension commitments he had restructured, about the people who had been here and were now gone. He thought about 18%. Then he had his team pull the full list of Hale Capital shareholders, and he found something that made the 18% considerably more significant. 4% of Hale Capital's voting shares had been distributed to Maria Vasquez directly in Richard's will, not through the trust, directly, processed through the estate settlement 1 year ago by Daniel's own legal team, buried in the distribution schedule, unremarked upon because it had represented a small figure in a large document. 4%, plus 18% from the trust, 22% total. Daniel pulled the shareholder registry and looked at it for a long time. 22%, in a company whose ownership was distributed across 11 major shareholders. No single entity held more than 31%. Combined voting blocks had shifted board decisions before at far lower percentages. 22% was not a majority, but it was not nothing. He called his attorney again. His attorney had been waiting for this call. "She can't remove me," Daniel said. "Tell me she can't remove me." His attorney was quiet for a moment that lasted slightly too long. "Alone," the attorney said, "22% is not sufficient to force a CEO removal unilaterally." Another pause. "But I've been doing some additional research since this morning. There are 2 other shareholders, Kellerman Asset Management and the Hargrove Family Trust. Together they hold 29%. Both have been expressing private concerns about the company's direction for the past 6 months." His voice was careful. "If Miss Vasquez were to approach either party—" "She wouldn't," Daniel said. "Daniel," his attorney said, "she has Elias Crane advising her. Elias Crane knows every shareholder in this company. He knew your father for 40 years. A pause. "I would not assume what she would or wouldn't do." Daniel sat at his desk for a long time after the call ended. He looked at the framed photograph from his graduation. Then he stood up, put on his coat, and went to find the address his security team had pulled 6 days ago. This is exactly where the story turns. What Maria says when Daniel walks through that door and what she shows him is everything. Stay right here.
He arrived at her building at 7:15 in the evening. He had not called ahead. He told himself this was strategic. It was not strategic. It was because he was not sure he would go if he had time to reconsider. Maria buzzed him in without hesitation. He climbed 5 flights and found her apartment door open, Maria already in the kitchen. She had known he was coming, not because she had been told, but because she had known Daniel Hale for 36 years, and she understood the shape of Daniel's decisions. He came into the apartment and stopped in the entrance hallway. There was a small table by the door with photographs on it. His college graduation, his father, Maria standing slightly to the left, included on Richard's quiet instruction, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who is very happy and does not require anyone to know it. Daniel looked at that photograph. "Sit down," Maria said from the kitchen. He sat at the kitchen table. She made tea without asking, set a cup in front of him, sat across from him with her own.
The apartment was small and organized and had the quality of a place where someone has lived with intention for a long time. It was nothing like the estate. It was entirely like Maria. "You challenged the trust," she said. "Yes." "And your attorneys told you?" "Yes." She nodded once. "I need to understand what he did," Daniel said. His voice had none of Tuesday's authority in it. What it had instead was the voice of a man who has spent 6 days building a wall and has just discovered that the wall was built on air. "The shares, the trust, 27 years. He never told me." "No," Maria said. "Why?" "Because he hoped you would never need to know." She turned her cup in her hands. "The trust was a precaution, not a plan. Richard did not build it because he expected this. He built it because he trusted me and because he loved you enough to prepare for the worst of you." Daniel looked at the table. "Vanessa," she started. "Is not the question," Maria said. "You made the decision. She may have shaped the path to it, but you walked down it." He was quiet. "The company is in trouble," he said finally. "I know. Aldrich is pulling his commitment. I have 2 more resignations on my desk. The operational gaps are—" He stopped. "Bigger than I told anyone." "I know," Maria said again. He looked up. "How?" "Because people talk to me," Maria said simply. "They always have. Your father understood that the people who run a house or a company carry more information than the org chart suggests. That is why he valued them." He paused. "That is why you should have valued them." Daniel's jaw tightened, not with anger, with the specific tension of someone receiving an accurate assessment of themselves. "What are you going to do?" he said. Maria looked at him for a long moment. "It depends on what you're going to do," she said. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed 2 things on the table: a handwritten list, 11 names, and a sealed white envelope, Richard Hale's handwriting on the front, "For Daniel, when he is ready." Daniel stared at the envelope. "He left this with you?" His voice had changed completely. "He left several things with me. That one was always for you. The timing was mine to judge." She slid the list toward him. "Read this first."
He read the list slowly. 11 names. The groundskeeper of 19 years whose contract was terminated in the restructuring. 3 investment team members whose institutional knowledge had left with them. Rosa, 8 months at the estate, called into Daniel's office and told that sympathy for terminated employees was unprofessional. The logistics firm. Former pension holders. 4 more people whose connection to the Hale estate had been severed in 18 months. At the bottom of the list, in slightly different ink, pension commitments. All of them. Daniel looked at the list for a long time. "This is what I want," Maria said. "Not for myself. I will receive what your father arranged, and I need nothing beyond that." She folded her hands. "These people gave years to your family. Some of them have nothing else. Your father made commitments to them that you canceled because they were a line item rather than a person. I want them restored. The pensions, the positions for those willing to return, the contracts." She paused. "And I want you to do it personally, not a representative, not a letter from the administrative office. You." "And the shares," Daniel said. "The shares are mine. Richard intended them that way, and I will keep them." Her voice was steady and final. "I will not use them to punish you. I will vote them the way your father would have, in the company's long-term interest." She looked at him. "Provided the man I'm looking at right now is who you intend to be." "And if I don't follow through," Daniel said, "then I call Elias Crane, and Elias calls Kellerman in Hargrove, and we request an emergency board review of the CEO's conduct, specifically the provisions in the company charter protecting long-term employee commitments that your restructuring violated."
Her voice was not cold, it was simply factual. You would likely survive it, but it would be public, it would be expensive, and it would confirm everything Aldrich already suspects. She paused. Your father anticipated this possibility. His documents address it directly. Daniel looked at the sealed envelope on the table. He picked it up. The weight of it was not physically significant. It felt heavy anyway. He opened it. Richard's handwriting, 2 pages, the same careful script from birthday cards and recipes pressed into Daniel's hands before school. Daniel, if you are reading this, Maria decided the time was right. That means something happened that required her to decide. I want you to sit with that before you read further. She helped me when I could not help myself. 27 years ago, 3 men I trusted nearly destroyed everything I had built, not because of incompetence, through deliberate fraud constructed over 4 years to look like my failure. I had no proof, I had no allies, I had a company that was 4 weeks from collapse, and partners who had already started rewriting the narrative. Maria found the evidence, not because I asked her to, because she was paying attention the way people pay attention when they care about something beyond their own position. She brought it to me quietly, without condition, without asking anything in return. When I tried to reward her, she told me she had done it because it was right. I built the trust because I could not leave her unprotected after I was gone. I built it also because I knew you. I love you completely. I also know intelligence without loyalty is a very efficient machine with no purpose. Your grandfather taught me this. Maria taught it to me again when I needed reminding. The people around you are not costs to be optimized. They are the company. Every relationship your grandfather built, every person I kept, every commitment I honored, that is the actual asset. Everything else is just paper. If Maria has shown you this letter, it is because she still believes you are worth helping. I trusted her judgment for 30 years. I trusted now more than I trust my own. Be the man she believes you can be. Your father. Daniel set the letter down. He sat with his hands flat on the paper and his head bent for a long time. The apartment was completely quiet. When he looked up, his eyes were red and his face had lost every layer of the person he had been for the past 18 months. What was underneath was younger and considerably less certain, and entirely recognizable to Maria, who had known him since he was 4 years old, sitting at the top of the stairs in his pajamas. I'm sorry, he said. Not managed, not strategic, just true. Maria looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand on his, briefly, the way she had 36 years ago, on the top step of the grand staircase. I know, she said. Now, finish your tea. And then we are going to talk about what comes next.
What came next moved faster than anyone expected. Daniel called Rosa the following morning. She listened in silence for 2 minutes, accepted without drama, and said she would be there Monday. She was. The groundskeeper returned after a conversation Daniel had told no one about, during which several things were discussed that had nothing to do with the garden and everything to do with what Richard Hale believed a workplace was for. He returned on the condition that his contract be restored to its original terms. It was. Every pension on the list was reinstated within 10 days, not announced as a corporate initiative, not processed through a PR filter. Done, with individual letters signed by Daniel explaining that an error in the restructuring had been identified and corrected. 11 letters, 11 people, each one opened by someone who had not expected to hear anything at all. 3 of the investment team returned. The 4th had accepted a position elsewhere and declined politely. Daniel sent a handwritten note. She kept it without responding.
which was its own kind of answer.
The meeting with Aldrich happened on a Thursday in January. Daniel walked into it with the full operational documentation, the pension restorations, the vendor contract renewals, and a strategic plan that looked nothing like the previous 18 months. Aldrich listened for 45 minutes, asked 7 questions. At the end of the meeting, over coffee, he said that Richard would have been pleased with the direction. Daniel did not disagree. Vanessa was not part of what came next. That conversation had happened the week after the kitchen table meeting, brief and honest and final. Vanessa had assessed the situation accurately and made her own calculation. She left without drama. What she did not take with her was any of the damage she had constructed, because the damage was Daniel's to own, and he had chosen to own it.
Maria returned to the estate in February, not as a household employee, as a stakeholder and formal advisor, a position Elias Crane had helped structure, documented and compensated and acknowledged rather than invisible, the way things had been for 30 years. She moved back into the East Wing rooms that had been hers for 2 decades. The view from her window was the garden, which Richard had specified when the rooms were assigned because he knew she liked to watch things grow. On her first morning back, she came downstairs and found Rosa already in the kitchen. Rosa looked at her. "I knew you'd be back," she said. She poured a cup of coffee without asking and set it on the counter. "Did you?" Maria said. "First week I worked here, saw your photograph in the hallway. 30 years. That kind of thing doesn't end with a security guard in a bag." Maria accepted the coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden. The winter had stripped it back, but the structure was still there, the bones of it, the things that were planted long ago and survived everything since. "No, it doesn't."
Daniel Hale fired the woman who raised him. He did it because someone had convinced him that loyalty was an inefficiency, that the people who stay are a liability rather than a foundation, that 30 years of presence and care can be processed with a form letter and minimum severance. He was wrong, and the cost of being wrong was discovering that the woman he had dismissed as old-fashioned and unnecessary had been entrusted by his father with 22% of his company and the documented proof that his own restructuring had violated the charter provisions she had the standing to enforce. Richard Hale knew his son. He loved him completely and without illusion. He had spent 27 years quietly, patiently, building a safeguard, not because he wanted to punish Daniel, but because he knew that some lessons cannot be taught in advance. They can only be lived. The lesson was this: the people who show up when it is not required, who stay when leaving would be easier, who hold your secrets and carry your grief and sit beside you at the top of the stairs in the dark, those people are not staff. They are the thing that makes everything else worth having. Maria knew this her whole life. Daniel Hale learned it the only way some people can. The hard way. At the kitchen table, with a cup of tea and his father's handwriting, and a woman who had already decided before he walked through the door that he was still worth helping. Richard Hale trusted Maria with the most important thing he had. Not his money, not his company, the truth. And she carried it for 2 years through everything until the moment it was needed. Here is what I want to know. If you were Maria, after 30 years, after the form letter, after the minimum severance, after being walked out by a security guard, would you have shown Daniel that letter? Or would you have called Elias Crane and let the board review run? There is no wrong answer. Tell me what you would have done in the comments below. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that button and turn on the notification bell.
because the next story is already written, and you do not want to miss it.